continued. Chapter 4 continued. I'll just take up from where I left off. But my dear, as to garden stuff, you were saying that any accidental omission is supplied in a moment by Lady Denham's gardener. But it occurs to me that we ought to go elsewhere upon such occasions, and that old Stringer and his son have a higher claim. I encouraged him to set up, and I'm afraid he does not do very well. That is, there is not enough time yet. There has not been time enough yet. He will do very well beyond a doubt. But at first it is uphill work, and therefore we must give him what help we can. And when any vegetables or fruit happen to be wanted, and it will not be amiss to have them often wanted, to have something or other forgotten most days, just to have a nominal supply, you know, that poor old Andrew may not lose his daily job, but in fact to buy the chief of our consumption of the Stringers. Very well, my love, that can easily be done, and cook will be satisfied, which will be a great comfort, for she is always complaining of old Andrew now, and says he never brings her what she wants there. Now the old house is quite left behind. What is it your brother says about its being a hospital? Oh, my dear Mary, merely a joke of his. He pretends to advise me to make a hospital of it. He pretends to laugh at my improvements. Sidney says anything, you know. He has always said what he chose of, and to us all. Most families have such a member among them, I believe. Miss Hayward, there is someone in most families privileged by superior abilities or spirits to say anything. In ours it is Sidney, who is a very clever young man and with great powers of pleasing. He lives too much in the world to be settled. That is his only fault. He is here and there and everywhere. I wish we may get him to Sanditon. I should like to have you acquainted with him, and it would be a fine thing for the place. Such a young man as Sidney, with his neat equipage and fashionable air. You and I, Mary, know what effect it might have. Many a respectable family, many a careful mother, many a pretty daughter might it secure us, to the prejudice of Eastbourne and Hastings. They were now approaching the church and the real village of Sanditon, which stood at the foot of the hill, where they were afterwards to ascend, a hill whose side was covered with the woods and enclosures of Sanditon House, and whose height ended in an open down where the new buildings might soon be looked for. A branch only of the valley, winding more obliquely towards the sea, gave a passage to an inconsiderable stream, and formed at its mouth a third habitable division in a small cluster of fishermen's houses. The village contained little more than cottages, but the spirit of the day had been caught, as Mr. Parker observed with delight to Charlotte, and 2 or 3 of the best of them were smartened up with a white curtain and lodgings to let, and farther on, in the little green court of an old farmhouse, 2 females in elegant white were actually to be seen with their books and camp stools, and in turning the corner of the baker's shop, the sound of a harp might be heard through the upper casement. Such sights and sounds were highly blissful to Mr. Parker. Not that he had any personal concern in the success of the village itself, for considering it as too remote from the beach, he had done nothing there, but it was a most valuable proof of the increasing fashion of the place altogether. If the village could attract, the hill might be nearly full. He anticipated an amazing season. At the same time last year, late in July, there had not been a single lodger in the village, nor did he remember any during the whole summer, excepting 1 family of children who came from London for sea air after the whooping cough, and whose mother would not let them be nearer the shore for fear of their tumbling in. Civilization, civilization indeed, cried Mr. Parker, delighted. Look, my dear Mary, Look at William Healy's windows, blue shoes and nankin boots. Who would have expected such a sight at a shoemaker's in old Sanditon? This is new within the month. There was no blue shoe when we passed this way a month ago. Glorious indeed. Well, I think I have done something in my day. Now for our hill, our health-breathing hill. In ascending, they passed the lodge gates of Sanditon House and saw the top of the house itself amongst its groves. It was the last building of former days in that line of the parish. A little higher up, the modern began, and in crossing the down, a Prospect House, a Bellevue Cottage, and a Denham Place were all to be looked at by Charlotte with the calmness of amused curiosity, and by Mr. Parker with the eager eye which hoped to see scarcely an empty house. Any empty houses. For bills at the window, more bills at the window than he had calculated on, and a smaller show of company on the hill, fewer carriages, fewer walkers. He had fancied it just the time of day for them to be all returning from their airings to dinner. But the sands and the terrace always attracted some, and the tide must be flowing, about half-tide now. He longed to be on the sands, the cliffs, at his own house, and everywhere out of his house at once. His spirits rose with the very sight of the sea, and he could almost feel his ankle getting stronger already. Trafalgar House, on the most elevated spot on the down, was a light, elegant building, standing in a small lawn with a very young plantation round it, about 100 yards from the brow of a steep but not very lofty cliff, and the nearest to it of every building, except in one short row of smart-looking houses called the Terrace, with a broad walk in front, aspiring to be the mole of the place. In this row were the best milliners' shops and the library a little detached from it, the hotel and billiard room. Here began the descent to the beach and to the bathing machines, and this was therefore the favourite spot for beauty and fashion. At Trafalgar House, rising a little distance behind the terrace, the travellers were safely set down, and all was happiness and joy between Papa and Mamma and their children, while Charlotte, having received possession of her apartment, found amusement enough in standing at her ample Venetian window and looking over the miscellaneous foreground of unfinished buildings, waving linen, and tops of houses, to the sea, dancing and sparkling in sunshine and freshness. End of chapter 4.